Welcome to episode 6 of the Reflux Cycle Show. In this episode, we're going to talk about the low FODMAP diet. The low FODMAP diet has been published in international medical journals and is now accepted and recommended as one of the most effective dietary therapies for irritable bowel syndrome. This according to Dr. Sue Shepherd of shepherdworks.com, one of the diet's inventors. The diet was actually created in Melbourne, Australia in the early 2000s as a way to manage painful bloating and gas characteristic of irritable bowel disorders. Now, when I first heard of it, I will admit that I completely discounted it. It's because people were telling me that they were unable to eat fiber while on this diet. And it just didn't make any sense to me given the essential role of fiber in restoring and maintaining a healthy gut. Now, in this show, I'll explain that paradox and what can be done about it. But first, I do need to remind you that this show is for informational purposes only and to give you ideas for you and your physician to research. It is not intended to be individualized advice to treat, cure, mitigate, or prevent any medical condition. Now, one more thing, be sure to give this show a thumbs up and subscribe, and it would be even more amazing if you'd be willing to leave a review on iTunes. Right now, the show is number 175 in the alternative health category, and with your help, we can get this important information out to many more people who need to hear it. With that, let me cover some of the basics of the diet. Now, if you're already familiar, feel free to jump ahead using the timestamps in your player or in the description below. Now, FODMAP is a really ugly acronym that stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols, which are short-chain carbohydrates or sugars that the small intestines can absorb poorly. The term FODMAP doesn't show up on food labels, so there have been numerous books and internet resources that put together categories of foods that are considered either low or high FODMAP. With that listing of foods in hand, dieters typically begin the first phase of a two-phase plan. Phase 1 consists of restricting all FODMAP foods for 4 to 6 weeks. And in the second phase, restricted foods are gradually reintroduced to determine which FODMAPs an individual can tolerate. FODMAPs exist across all food groups, including vegetables, fruits, meats, dairy, grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, condiments, sweeteners, drinks, etc. But I'll just give you a few examples. Under the category of vegetables and legumes, for instance, things that would be considered high FODMAP and things you would want to avoid would be examples like garlic, onions, asparagus. Low FODMAP items would be things like broccoli, carrots, and cabbage. Under fruits, examples of high FODMAP, the ones you want to avoid, would be things like apples, apricots, and ripe bananas, where low FODMAP would include things like unripe bananas, blueberries, and grapes. For an example, under the category of meats, you have things in the high FODMAP category, such as sausages and processed meats, and under the low FODMAP category, beef, chicken, and lamb. There are many other categories, such as milk and dairy, grains, nuts and seeds, condiments, sweeteners, and drinks, as I've covered before. But there are hundreds of foods on this list, and so I couldn't possibly cover them all in this episode. Some are even listed with specific serving sizes that would be okay. Now, for a downloadable PDF, see my link to ibsdiets.org in the show notes. Now, the problem is low FODMAP diet has actually been shown clinically to increase microbial imbalance at the gut in just 4 weeks' time. Idealnutrition.com explains that the low FODMAP diet is a very restrictive diet that limits the whole host of healthy foods that would otherwise nurture and improve gut health. In particular, the diet restricts a number of foods that are prebiotic rich. This is because fructans and galacto-oligosaccharides are prebiotic fibers. Now, let me share with you the results of several studies on the topic. The American Gastroenterology Association published an article last year that shared the results of clinical trial of a low FODMAP diet. They performed a randomized trial of 52 individuals to investigate the effects of a low FODMAP diet on gut symptoms and the microbiome. A little over 50% of those patients reported some relief of gut symptoms following the low FODMAP diet as compared to 16% in the control diet. However, in just 4 weeks, stool samples revealed significantly lower strains of bifidobacterium, among others, as compared to the control group. Now, in another study by Vall-d'Hebron Research Institute of Barcelona in Spain, researchers compared the effects of a low FODMAP diet with a placebo versus a prebiotic supplement and a Mediterranean-type diet for 4 weeks. As expected, the low FODMAP diet improved IBS symptoms such as pain, distension, bloating, and flatulence, but decreased bifidobacteria, in line with previous studies. Bifidobacteria increased 2 weeks following the discontinuation of the low FODMAP diet, showing that this change was transient. Now, this underscores the importance of prebiotic fibers. So let's talk about how you can ensure that if you're doing a low FODMAP diet, you're still able to ingest the prebiotic fibers your body needs to begin healing. In a meta-study published by MDPI, a publisher of peer-reviewed medical journals, it took a look at 13 different randomized control trials and 2 open-label studies. These studies investigated the impacts of a high and low FODMAP on patients with irritable bowel syndrome and colorectal cancer. The journal article correctly points out the inherent conflict between health-promoting benefits of non-digestible fibers and the low FODMAP diet. Now, one of the things that I first noticed about this meta-study was in this quote: "In addition, lower bifidobacterium abundance has been linked to abdominal pain in healthy individuals and IBS patients. Given that most studies associated with improvement of symptoms, these results hold an interesting paradox, specifically that dietary intervention that seems to benefit patients regarding symptoms also results in a reduction of bifidobacteria, which are positively correlated with pain relief." Now, this means that people on a low FODMAP diet may be gaining short-term relief from avoiding pain associated with excess fermentation in the intestines, only to have that pain increased in severity and frequency once bifidobacterium populations and others are further depleted. The article continues, "Since FODMAPs are a major energy source for colonic microbes, bacterial loads can be expected to vary with FODMAP intake. Such effects are indeed noted in healthy individuals, where high fiber diets or prebiotic supplements are associated with higher bacterial densities and or higher fecal volume. In other words, the body relies on key bacterial strains such as bifidobacteria to ferment prebiotic components and stimulate the growth of other beneficial species through cross-feeding. A healthy ecosystem of bacteria is key in modulating immune function, producing compounds essential for cell energy, producing and converting hormones, managing inflammation, gut function, gut permeability, and more. The good news is that this meta-study reveals that probiotics can help to partly counteract some of these changes. Additionally, increasing non-digestible carbohydrate intake can be applied to ensure adequate prebiotics. The study notes that symptoms reappeared immediately in patients after quitting the low FODMAP diet, while patients of the prebiotic arm experienced reduced symptoms for an additional 2 weeks. This suggests that prebiotic supplementation may be a viable treatment option for those who can endure the initial startup phase. Now, sadly, none of these studies actually extend beyond the 4 to 8 weeks, so long-term results are yet to be studied. So then how does one continue with a low FODMAP diet while ensuring adequate prebiotic dietary fibers? A great article by dietversusdisease.org explains how to maintain a healthy gut microbiome while on the low FODMAP diet. I'll include a link to it and a few other articles on the subject in the show notes. The article explains that the low FODMAP diet excludes a lot of prebiotic foods because many of them are high FODMAP. Now, recognizing this, it is important to eat a variety of low FODMAP, high fiber foods. Some examples include under vegetables and legumes, cabbage, chickpeas, black beans, carrots, under fruits, raspberries, green bananas, under grains, quinoa and whole grain rice, under nuts and seeds, chia seeds, pumpkin seeds, almonds. As mentioned, check out my article at theacidrefluxguy.com/006 to see links to additional articles that can provide you a full listing of low FODMAP, high fiber foods that you should be considering in your diet. So it is clear that fiber, diversity of diet, and potentially probiotics are key to rebuild or maintain bacterial balance while doing a low FODMAP diet. But what can compromise that plan? To answer that, I want to share with you a story from a few months ago. My 12-year-old son actually dealt with painful gas and IBS-like symptoms once or twice a week for most of his life. He has several extended family members on my wife's side going back that have dealt with these types of painful symptoms for their lives. For a long time, we just thought it was hereditary. It wasn't until I began researching reflux where I started to believe that we could in some way intervene. Now, because of his age, we took our time to decide what to do because we were hesitant to experiment with him or try something too crazy. We didn't do a low FODMAP diet, but we did introduce probiotics and ensure that he ate a fiber-rich diet. We did one other thing, which I believe was key to his recovery. We planned for him to do a 30-day course of probiotics, and while doing so, we were strict to avoid all sugar. And this was enough for him to relieve the painful gas that he experienced for much of his life. And I share that to point out that other poor dietary choices, such as those that contain refined sugars, sugar substitutes, high fat, processed foods, food triggers, can lead to things like inflammation, not to mention stress, medications, and other risk factors can hinder progress. And I want to hear from you. What additional questions do you have about this topic, or what other topics would you like to hear about? Let me know in the comments below. As I mentioned, the show notes for this episode can be found at theacidrefluxguy.com/006. My name is Don, and this was another episode of The Reflux Cycle. Signing off.